The scent of garlic chili oil and slow-simmered bone broth clung to Lena like a second skin, a perfume she wore with more pride than any bottle of French fragrance. In Misty Peaks, her noodle cart wasn't just a business, it was a landmark. Regulars argued that her mala tongmian could cure heartbreak, hangovers, and existential dread in a single, numbing, glorious bowl. So when the sleek black sedan, looking as out of place as a swan in a duck pond, pulled up beside her cart on that fog-drenched morning, Lena didn't look up from her dough. She was wrist-deep in flour, rhythmically folding and pulling, turning a simple ball into strands as fine as silk. Lena. The voice was unfamiliar, strained with city impatience. She glanced up. A man in a tailored suit stood there, his shoes already dusted with the fine, eternal mist of the peaks. Behind him, a woman in a stiff pencil skirt and a scowl surveyed the scene like it was a biohazard zone. This, Lena realized with a sinking feeling, was her father, Liang, and his wife, Viola. "Your shift," Liang said, his words clipped. "It's over. Get in the car." Lena wiped her hands on her apron, leaving twin flower prints. "My shift ends when the last local has had their breakfast, and old man Chen hasn't had his congee yet." "You're blocking the queue." A vein throbbed in Liang's temple. Viola sighed, a sound of profound suffering. "We've been driving for hours." "This is what you've been doing? Playing in the dirt with flour?" "I'm making a living," Lena corrected, her tone flat. "Something my mother taught me to do very well." The mention of her mother, Lin Feng, made Liang flinch. It was the only crack in his polished facade. "Your mother left you more than this cart, Lena. She left you a legacy. One you cannot access here." That got her attention. She stopped pulling noodles. Her mother had died when she was 8, leaving behind the cart, a worn set of superior German knives, and a cryptic, leather-bound book filled with what looked like culinary poems and bizarre ingredient lists Lena had never fully deciphered. "What legacy?" she asked, suspicion narrowing her eyes. "A seat at the Celestial Dragon Culinary Institute in Lumina Bay," Viola interjected, her voice dripping with a saccharine falseness. "The most prestigious cooking academy in the hemisphere. Your mother was an alumna. Her connections secured it." CDCI, the name was a myth, a beacon for every aspiring chef. Lena had dreamed of it, once, in the way one dreams of flying to the moon. Impossible. But the cart was real. The hungry people in line were real. "I have a life here," she stated. "You have a stall," Liang corrected, a strange desperation in his eyes. "In Lumina Bay, you could have an empire. It was your mother's wish." That was a low blow. Lena's heart, a sturdy organ hardened by years of early mornings and hot stoves, gave a painful squeeze. What had her mother wished for her? All she remembered was the smell of star anise and ginger, and laughter that sounded like wind chimes. The negotiation that followed was less a discussion and more a siege. Liang played his final card, looking older and more tired than his suit suggested. "There is also a matter of debt. A promise I made to your mother. I need your help to fulfill it. Please." The please did it. It was raw, unvarnished, and utterly out of place. Against every instinct screaming that this was a beautifully packaged mistake, Lena nodded. She handed the cart keys to her tearful assistant, packed a single duffel bag, apron, knives, her mother's book, and got in the car. Lumina Bay was a sensory assault. Where Misty Peaks was muted greens and grays with the soothing soundtrack of rustling pines, Lumina Bay was a kaleidoscope of neon, steel, and the relentless hum of ambition. The house wasn't a home, it was a minimalist showroom where you were afraid to sit down. Her stepbrother, Jean Wei, a boy her age with perfectly gelled hair and a permanently bored expression, looked her up and down and snorted. "They let just anyone into CDCI these days, I guess. Hope you brought more than peasant wear." Lena ignored him, her fingers tracing the embossed dragon on her acceptance letter. It felt real. Orientation at CDCI was a whirlwind of starched chefs' whites and arrogant chatter about sous vide techniques and truffle oil futures. Lena felt like a sparrow among peacocks. The first practical class was Fundamentals of Flavor Architecture, taught by the formidable Chef Roland. Today, Chef Roland boomed, "We explore balance. You will create a simple vinaigrette. Not just any vinaigrette. One that sings." As the other students reached for expensive imported vinegars and rare, cold-pressed oils, Lena worked with what felt intuitive: a good rice vinegar, local peanut oil, a touch of rock sugar, a whisper of finely minced ginger. She made an emulsion that was bright, slightly sweet, and deeply fragrant. Interesting choice of aromatics, a cool voice said beside her. She turned. The boy was tall, with sharp features and eyes the color of dark roast coffee. His whites were immaculate, his station perfectly ordered. His name tag read Kai Shin. Even she had heard of the Shins. Culinary royalty. Ginger isn't an aromatic here, she challenged, not missing the slight curl of his lip. It's a blunt instrument if not used with finesse, he said, not looking at her as he meticulously zested a lime. We strive for subtlety here. Not street food punch. The dismissal, the casual classism, ignited something in her. Subtlety is just another word for being afraid of flavor. He finally looked at her, his gaze assessing, cold. You are Lina. The special admit from the mountains. He said it like a diagnosis. Let's see what your flavor produces. Chef Roland tasted the vinaigrettes down the line. He gave polite nods, technical corrections. He stopped at Kai Shin's. Excellent. Precision. The lime is a bright, clean top note. A sophisticated, if safe, composition. Then he came to Lina's. He dipped a spoon, tasted. His eyebrows shot up. He tasted again. This has a narrative. It starts bright, then the ginger warmth comes through, and the sugar rounds it out. It's not just a dressing, it's a journey. Unorthodox, but brilliant. A flush of pride warmed Lina's cheeks. She dared a glance at Kai Shin. His expression was unreadable, but a muscle ticked in his jaw. The real clash came hours later in the grand tasting hall. It was a weekly event where students showcased small dishes. Kai Shin presented a deconstructed lemon tart, a perfect quenelle of yuzu cream, a shard of caramelized sugar, a dusting of freeze-dried raspberry powder. It was a sculpture, beautiful and bloodless. Lina, drawing on the only pantry she'd had time to raid, the student commissary, presented Misty Peaks in a bowl. It was a hot soup dumpling, xiaolongbao, but instead of the traditional pork gelatin, she'd made a clear, intense broth from roasted mushrooms and mountain herbs, captured inside a delicate wrapper. Beside it, a tiny spray of foraged pine tips. The hall was silent as Chef Roland and the visiting critics tasted. Kai Shin's dish received murmurs of approval. Technically flawless, a critic said. Then they tasted Lina's. The moment the broth burst in their mouths, their eyes widened. It was the essence of the mountains, earthy, deep, clean, and surprising. This, Chef Roland declared, his voice hushed, is soul. This is terroir on a spoon. The praise was a crescendo. Then, as the critics moved on, Kai Shin walked up to her station. His plate, with its flawless, untouched deconstruction, was in his hand. Soul, he said, his voice low enough only for her to hear, icy fire in his eyes. You call a parlor trick soul? You take a humble, perfect form and inject it with foraged weeds for shock value. You disrespect tradition for a moment of applause. The unfairness of it stole her breath. Tradition isn't a prison, she shot back, her own temper flaring. It's a foundation. My mother taught me that. Maybe yours just taught you how to build a wall. His composure cracked, just for a second. A flash of something raw pain? Anger? Before the ice refroze. Your mother, he said, each word a shard of glass, was a brilliant woman who understood discipline. Something you clearly lack. He turned on his heel and walked away, leaving his beautiful, pointless plate on her station. But the battle lines were drawn. It wasn't about money or inheritance. It was a war of philosophy, plated and served in front of the entire school. And Lina, the noodle cart heiress, had just fired the first, delicious shot. As she stood there, the adrenaline fading, she caught her father Liang watching from the shadows of the hall. He wasn't looking at her triumph or her rivalry. He was staring at Kai Shin with an expression of pure, unvarnished fear. The silence in the Shin family car was thicker than day-old kanji. Kai Shin hadn't so much as glanced in Lina's direction since their very public, very heated exchange in the tasting hall. He simply stared out the window at the blurring lights of Lumina Bay, his profile a cold marble sculpture. He'd offered her a ride, or more accurately, his driver had been instructed to offer her a ride in a move that felt less like courtesy and more like a custodial transfer. You don't have to do this, Lina finally said, her voice cutting through the luxurious quiet. The metro is fine. The metro is inefficient, he replied, not turning. And you are now a point of interest. It's better you're not waylaid. Waylaid? By who? Adoring fans, she snapped, the residual anger from his weed's comment still simmering. By anyone. He finally looked at her, and the intensity in his gaze was unnerving. Not everyone at Celestial Dragon appreciates disruptive talent. My critique was professional. Others' motivations may not be. Was that a warning? Or a threat wrapped in faux concern? Before she could dissect it, the car glided to a halt not at the imposing gates of her father's house, but outside a nondescript, old-world apothecary tucked between two glittering boutiques in the historic district. The sign read 10,000 fragrances in faded gold leaf. What is this? Lena asked. Your next class is ingredient anthropology with Professor Wen, Kai stated, getting out. He believes understanding begins at the source. This is one of his sources. Inside, the shop was a time capsule. The air was a complex symphony of dusty, sweet, bitter, and pungent notes. Glass jars lined walnut shelves, holding everything from lumpy golden turmeric roots to iridescent dried scorpions. An ancient man with magnifying glasses perched on his nose looked up from weighing a pile of burgundy-colored berries. Young Master Shen, the old man nodded, then his sharp eyes landed on Lina. And you bring a new curiosity. Professor Wen's new student, Lina, Kai introduced, his tone devoid of warmth. She needs to understand the difference between culinary ingredients and foraged novelties. Lina ignored the jab, her attention captured by a small, ceramic jar with a wax seal. The label, handwritten, simply said, Mountain Sai. Her fingers itched to open it. It smelled, impossibly, like the air just before dawn in Misty Peak's damp moss, stone, and a faint hint of alpine flower. That is not for sale, the old man said softly, watching her. It is a relic. A gift, long ago, from a chef who understood silence. Lina's heart thumped. Who? The old man just smiled enigmatically. Kaishin's watch beeped, a sharp, modern sound in the ancient room. We're late. He turned to leave, but not before Lina saw him exchange a significant, silent look with the shopkeeper. A look that spoke of shared secrets. Her mother's book, heavy in her backpack, seemed to pulse against her spine. The practical exam in sauce craftsmanship was the stuff of legend, designed to break the overconfident. Each student was given a base of bland, overcooked piece of sea base and access to a sprawling, but deliberately incomplete, pantry. The challenge, transform the tragedy on the plate into a masterpiece in 45 minutes. The secret catch, each student's station was missing one critical, common ingredient. Lina's station had no citrus. No lemon, no lime, no vinegar. A deliberate handicap to prevent the bright, acidic lift the flaky, oily fish desperately needed. Across the gleaming kitchen aisle, she saw Jean Wei smirking as he juiced a fat yuzu. Coincidence? Unlikely. She took a steadying breath, closing her eyes. What would the cart need? She thought of balance. Without acid to cut through, she needed sweetness and umami to compensate, and texture to distract. She grabbed dried shiitakes, soy, a touch of rock sugar, and began reducing a glaze. For texture, she flash-fried fine julienne lotus root into a golden nest. It was fine. It was safe. It wasn't inspired. Then she caught a scent. A warm, citrus-adjacent perfume that wasn't citrus at all. Kaffir lime leaves. They were at the very back of the shared herb wall. As she moved to get them, she saw Kaishin at his own station. He was working with calm, surgical precision. His missing ingredient? Fresh chili. He was making a beurre blanc, a classic French butter sauce, delicate and rich. Without heat, it would be cloying. Their eyes met for a fraction of a second. His gaze flickered to her empty citrus bowl, then to the kaffir lime leaves in her hand. A beat passed. Then, without a word, he reached into his own mise-en-place and slid a small, unmarked vial of vibrant orange oil across the stainless steel counter towards her. It stopped just at the line separating their stations. Tasmanian pepperberry oil. Not citrus, but possessing a startling, floral citrus punch with a unique numbing quality. Exotic. Expensive. A game changer. He said nothing, simply returned to torching the skin of his sea base to a perfect crisp. Why? Was this pity? A setup? She hesitated, her mind racing. Using it would mean accepting help from her rival. Not using it meant likely mediocrity. The clock ticked. Pride, her mother often laughed, was the worst spice. It spoiled every dish. Lena snatched the vial. 2 drops in her mushroom glaze. The transformation was instant. The deep, earthy umami was now laced with a haunting, aromatic high note that made the entire sauce vibrate with complexity. She plated the fish on the lotus nest, drizzled the glossy glaze, and finished with a single, pristine kaffir leaf. When Chef Roland tasted it, he closed his eyes. "You salvaged the unsalvageable," he said. "You found brightness without citrus. This is inventive." Top marks. Jean Wei's dish, though technically proficient, was deemed unmemorable. He shot Lena a look of pure venom. After the class, as students filed out, Lena cornered Kaishan by the lockers. Why? He didn't pretend to misunderstand. The exercise was to overcome an obstacle. Your obstacle was arbitrary and petty. I dislike arbitrary obstacles. He spoke to his locker, arranging his knives with fastidious care. So it wasn't to help me. It was to correct an imbalance in the experiment. He slammed his locker shut. Don't read into it, Shanfu. The word meant mountain girl, and from him, it didn't sound like a compliment. And you're missing chili? She pushed. How did you fix your beurre blanc? A ghost of something, not a smile, but its mathematical equivalent touched his lips. I didn't need chili. I used a reduction of Szechuan peppercorn and black vinegar. Heat is not the only form of punctuation. With that, he walked away, leaving her standing there. He hadn't needed help at all. He'd simply given her the tool to win. That night, buried in the silent, oppressively clean mansion, Lena finally opened her mother's book under the pool of light from her desk lamp. The pages were filled with Lin Feng's elegant script. But interspersed with recipes for phoenix tail prawns and Jade Dynasty soup were lines that made no culinary sense. To find the gold, listen to the crow at the twin hour. The heart of the pepper is not its fire, but its memory of the sun. A harmony of 7, under the dragon's gaze, opens the way. It was code. A culinary cipher. Frustrated, she flipped to the very back cover. Tucked into the leather binding was a faded photograph. It showed her mother, young and laughing, standing arm in arm with 2 others in a CDCI kitchen. One was a younger, softer-looking Liang. The other was a severe, handsome man with familiar, dark roast eyes, Kaishan's grandfather. A cold understanding dripped down her spine. This wasn't just a cookbook. It was a map. And her presence here, at CDCI, was not an accident of legacy, but a key turning in a lock. Needing air, or at least a distraction from the sudden magnitude of it all, she padded downstairs for water. The house was dark except for a sliver of light under the door to Liang's study. She heard his voice, low and strained. I delivered her, as agreed. She's at the school. She has the book. A pause. The voice on the other end was a distorted murmur from a speakerphone. I know what I promised. Liang's whisper was desperate, sharp with fear. The Phoenix Banquet recipes, yes, I believe they're in the code. She's smart, like her mother. She'll decode them. Just give me more time. Don't involve them. Don't involve the Iron Chefs. Lena froze, the cool marble floor leaching the warmth from her feet. Iron Chefs. Not a title, but a name. A threat. Her father's debt wasn't financial. It was a promise to deliver her mother's secrets. And he'd just thrown her, his own daughter, into the center of the debt collection. The murmur on the phone grew harsher. Liang's shoulders slumped in defeat. Yes, he whispered, sounding utterly broken. I understand. If she doesn't produce the recipes, you'll take other means. The line went dead. Lena shrank back into the shadows as Liang's study door opened. He looked decades older, his face ashen in the hallway light. He didn't see her. He just walked toward the stairs, a man heading to his own execution. Back in her room, Lena clutched her mother's book to her chest. The rivalry with Kaishan, the petty sabotage from Jean Wei, it was all noise. The real battle was just beginning. They weren't just after her talent. They were after the legacy in her hands. And the only person who seemed to understand the value and danger of that legacy was the infuriating, cryptic boy who'd given her pepperberry oil instead of a warning. She looked at the coded line again, a harmony of 7, under the dragon's gaze, opens the way. The celestial dragon's gaze. CDCI, she was already under it. The question was, who else was watching? The coded line haunted her. To find the gold, listen to the crow at the twin hour. Lena lay in her sterile bed, the words scrolling behind her eyelids. Twin hour. Midnight? The witching hour? And gold wasn't literal. In her mother's poetic shorthand, gold often meant a foundational ingredient, a key component. The crow a messenger? A sound, a memory surfaced, foggy with childhood sleep. Her mother, humming as she packed a small basket late at night. The best mushrooms, she'd whispered, don't wait for daylight. They speak to the moon. And Old Crow knows where they hide. Old Crow. It wasn't a bird. It was a person. A nickname. There was only one place in Lumina Bay where nicknames like that might still exist, where ingredients whispered secrets and transactions happened in shadows, the Jade Circle Midnight Market. An illicit, semi-legal bazaar that operated in the labyrinthine alleyways behind the official night market. It was where chefs and collectors found things that couldn't, or shouldn't, be found on daylight shelves. This was insane. It was also the only thread she had. Slipping out of the mansion was easier than she expected. Security was geared at keeping people out, not a determined daughter in. Dressed in dark jeans and a hoodie, her mother's book in a crossbody bag beneath it, she melted into the Lumina Bay night. The Jade Circle wasn't on any map. You found it by following the scent of rare spices undercut with the tang of whetstone and intrigue. It was a pulsating organism of makeshift stalls lit by lanterns and battery-powered LEDs. Here, a wizened woman sold luminous blue oyster mushrooms that glowed faintly. There, a man with scarred hands auctioned a jar of 100-year-old fermented black bean paste to a hushed, bidding crowd. Lena moved through the crowd, her senses overwhelmed. She wasn't looking for a mushroom vendor. She was listening. For the name Crow. Or for anything that resonated with the cryptic beauty of her mother's words. She stopped at a stall draped with strings of unusual dried chilies, like crimson alien jewelry. The vendor, a young man with tattoos of soup dragons on his forearms, caught her staring. Looking for heat, or a story? A story, Lena said, surprising herself. He pointed to a twisted, smoky black chili. Ghost pepper. Story is, it grows only on gravesites in the western hills. Tastes like regret and fire. She shook her head. Not right. She moved on, feeling time slip away. The twin hour was passing. Desperation began to itch at her skin. You look lost, little chef. The voice came from her left, cool and familiar, cutting through the market's din like a knife through butter. She turned, and her heart stuttered. Kai-shin. He leaned against a brick archway, shrouded in shadow, dressed not in chef's whites but in black from neck to boots. He looked like part of the market's dark architecture. What are you doing here? She breathed, panic and irritation flaring. I could ask you the same, he said, pushing off the wall to stand beside her. His proximity was unnerving. But it's obvious. You're following a trail from that book. It's a dangerous hobby. How do you know about the book? Everyone who matters knows about Lin Feng's book, he said quietly, his eyes scanning the crowd not with wonder, but with tactical assessment. The question is, do you know what you're holding? It's not a ticket to good grades. It's a target. Before she could retort, his hand clamped around her forearm. It wasn't aggressive, but it was iron firm. Don't look now. 2 men. 9 o'clock. By the Pearl Tea stall. They've been tracking you since you entered the circle. A chill that had nothing to do with the night air shot down her spine. She fought the urge to look. Who are they? Employees of a catering company, Kai said dryly, beginning to steer her gently but insistently down a narrower, darker alley branching off the main thoroughfare. A very aggressive, vertically integrated catering company. The Iron Chefs Consortium. They were here. We need to leave. Now. His voice was low, urgent. They moved quickly, Kai-shin navigating the twisting alleys with an unerring sense of direction. The sounds of the market faded, replaced by the echo of their footsteps and the drip of condensation from overhead pipes. The sense of pursuit was a palpable pressure at their backs. Why are you helping me? Lena gasped as they rounded a corner. I'm not, he said, his breath even. I'm mitigating a disaster. If they get the book from you here, tonight, the fallout will touch my family, my school. This is damage control. Of course. It was never about her. They burst out into a slightly wider service alley, only to find it a dead end, blocked by a mountain of stacked pallets and overflowing dumpsters. A shadow detached itself from a doorway ahead of them. Another blocked the way they'd come. Two men, broad-shouldered, moving with a quiet, professional menace. Miss Lee, the one in front said, his smile not reaching his eyes. "We'd like to have a word about your inheritance." Kai-shin stepped in front of her, placing himself between her and the men. "She's not interested. This doesn't concern you, Shin boy. Your grandfather's protection doesn't extend to back alleys." "Try me," Kai said, his voice dropping to something dangerous and soft. What happened next was a blur. The man lunged. Kai-shin didn't fight like a chef, he fought like someone who'd been trained for efficiency, not spectacle. It was a brutal, minimalist dance of deflections, pressure points, and shocking strikes. He used the man's momentum against him, slamming him into a dumpster with a metallic crash. The second man pulled a short, wicked-looking truncheon. Kai disarmed him with a move that looked like he was deftly boning a fish, but the man's wild swing caught Kai across the ribs before he went down. It was over in less than a minute. Both men were groaning on the filthy ground. Kai-shin stood over them, breathing slightly harder, one hand pressed to his side. In the dim light, Li Na saw his face was pale, a sheen of sweat on his brow. "Kai? I'm fine," he gritted out. But when he moved, he stumbled. She caught him, her arm around his waist, and felt the warm, alarming seep of blood through his black shirt. "You're not fine. You're stabbed. It's a scratch. A blunt laceration. Help me walk." They might have friends. Somehow, they stumbled out of the alley maze and into the brighter, safer chaos of the legitimate night market. The scent of sizzling skewers and sweet pancakes filled the air, a jarring contrast to the violence they'd left behind. Lina guided him to a small, brightly lit congee stall with a few plastic stools. The elderly woman running it took one look at Kai's pallor and wordlessly pointed to a back room. Inside, a tiny space stuffed with sacks of rice and dried goods, Lina made him sit on a crate. "Let me see." He hesitated, then with a wince, lifted his shirt. It wasn't a stab, but a deep, ugly gash along his lower ribs from the truncheon's edge. It was bleeding steadily. "I have a first aid kit," the old woman said, appearing with a tin box. "You fix. I keep watch." She gave Lina a long, knowing look before pulling the curtain closed. The silence in the cramped space was thick, charged with pain and unspoken things. Lina cleaned the wound, her hand steady despite the adrenaline shaking her core. He didn't flinch, but his breath hitched when she applied antiseptic. "You're good at that," he muttered, watching her hands. "Running a noodle cart, you learn to patch up everything from knife cuts to hot oil splatters." She taped a clean bandage in place. "Why did you do that? You could have walked away. Damage control would have been letting them take the book and be done with me." He leaned his head back against a sack of rice, closing his eyes. For the first time, he looked his age exhausted, young, burdened. "Because," he said, the word barely audible, "the book isn't the real treasure. You are." She froze, the roll of gauze in her hand. He opened his eyes, meeting hers. The icy shield was gone, replaced by a weary, painful honesty. "My grandfather loved your mother. Not romantically. As a sister, a fellow artist. He said she was the only one who understood that food wasn't about display or power. It was about harmony. The consortium they want to reverse engineer her recipes, strip out the soul, mass-produce the effects. Turn harmony cuisine into a chemical additive for emotional manipulation. A flavor drug." The horror of it settled in her gut, cold and heavy. "He made me promise," Kai continued, his voice raw. "Before he fell ill. Protect Lin Feng's legacy. Protect her heir. So yes, I followed you tonight. Yes, I've been watching you. The arrogance, the critique, it was meant to push you away, to make you seem less valuable, to make you leave CDCI and go back to your mountains where you'd be safe." A bitter, self-deprecating twist touched his lips. "It didn't work. You're as stubborn as she was." Lina sat back on her heels, the truth of it washing over her. His every barb, every cold interaction, had been a clumsy, misguided armor. "So all this time you were trying to save me by being a jerk?" A faint, real smile ghosted across his face. "It's a strategy with a historically low success rate, I'm told." They sat in silence for a moment, the sounds of the happy market outside a surreal soundtrack. The air between them had fundamentally shifted. The rivalry was still there, but it was now layered with something else, a reluctant, terrifying trust. The code, she said finally. I was looking for Old Crow. My mother mentioned him. Kai nodded slowly. He's here. Sells medicinal fungi 3 alleys east of here. He was a friend to both my grandfather and your mother. He winced as he adjusted his position. He won't talk to you if I'm with you. He doesn't trust the Shins anymore, thinks we've grown too close to the dragon's fire. He met her gaze. Go. Now. The twin hour is almost over. Ask him about the fragrance of harmony. It's the first key. But you're hurt, I'll be here. The auntie will watch me. Go, Lena. This is your path. Not mine. With one last, uncertain look at him, pale but resolute, his walls down for the first time, she slipped out of the back room and into the market's flow. Following his directions, she found a stall even more cloaked in shadow than the others, hung with strange, woody fungi that looked like pieces of a dark coral reef. Behind it sat an old man so wrinkled he seemed made of bark himself. His eyes, however, were sharp and clear. I'm looking for the fragrance of harmony, Lena said, her voice barely a whisper. The old man crow studied her for a long, silent minute. Then he reached under his stall and placed a small, unvarnished wooden box in front of her. He opened the lid. Inside, on a bed of velvet, lay a single, dried, silvery white blossom. It emitted no scent. The moon moth orchid, Crow rasped. It has no fragrance, until it is steeped in the tears of the mountain and the breath of the east wind. He pushed the box toward her. Your mother left this for you. She said you would know when to use it. The harmony is not in the ingredient. It is in the timing. Lena took the box, her fingers trembling. It was the first tangible piece of the puzzle, a gift from her mother across the years. When she returned to the kanji stall, Kaishin was on his feet, looking drawn but stable. He saw the box in her hands and gave a single, slow nod. Now you understand, he said. The war isn't in a classroom. It's in every kitchen, for the soul of taste itself. And you, Lena, whether you like it or not, are the standard bearer. They walked out of the night market together, not touching, but the space between them was no longer a battlefield. It was a fragile, nascent alliance, forged in blood and shadows and the silent promise of a scentless flower. The real lesson of the night wasn't about flavor architecture. It was about learning who your enemies were, and discovering, against all odds, who might just be a friend. The moon moth orchid lay in its wooden box on Lena's desk, a silent, silvery question mark. It looked less like a flower and more like a captured moonbeam, delicate and utterly inert. Steeped in the tears of the mountain and the breath of the east wind. Her mother's poetic codes were beautiful, but right now, infuriatingly opaque. The atmosphere at home was a different kind of opaque. Liang moved through the house like a ghost, jumping at shadows, his eyes perpetually ringed with sleepless guilt. He'd seen the bandages peeking from under Kaishin's shirt when he dropped her off at the gate, and the unspoken accusation in his daughter's eyes had made him physically flinch. Viola's politeness had hardened into a brittle, frozen silence. Jean Wei just seemed annoyed that the drama wasn't about him. The only place that made sense was the kitchen. Not the intimidating, stainless steel spectacle at CDCI, but the small, private practice kitchens in the school's basement, windowless, humid, and honest. It was there, 2 nights after the midnight market, that Kaishin found her. She was elbow-deep in a failed attempt to make a dashi. Not any dashi, but one that might whisper to a scentless orchid. Kombu, bonito flakes, spring water. It was fine. It was boring. You're thinking like a chemist, his voice came from the doorway, making her jump. He leaned against the frame, still moving a bit carefully, his usual arrogance softened into something more like focused intensity. Trying to force a reaction. Harmony cuisine is about invitation, not coercion. And you're an expert on my mother's philosophy now, she shot back, but the heat was gone from it. I had a good teacher. My grandfather. He entered, closing the door behind him. The small room suddenly felt smaller. He inspected her pot. The tears of the mountain aren't metaphorical. They're literal. A specific mineral water from a spring in the Misty Peaks range. Your mother had it shipped here, for special recipes. Lena stared at him. How do you know that? Because, he said, walking to a locked cabinet she'd assumed held cleaning supplies, my grandfather kept some for her. He produced a small key from his chain, unlocked it, and took out 3 unlabeled glass bottles filled with clear liquid. The breath of the east wind is simpler. It's not an ingredient. It's a technique. A specific steam infusion at dawn, when the air is still cool and carrying the scent of the sea from the east. He set the bottles on her station. An offering. A collaboration. Why are you giving me this? Because the recipe you're trying to unlock the phoenix rising broth isn't just a soup, he said, his gaze holding hers. It's a test. The first real test from your mother's book. And you can't pass it alone. No one can. It requires 4 hands. He nodded to the orchid. And that. The decision hung in the steam-filled air. Trust him, the boy who'd insulted her and then bled for her. Or walk away, keep the puzzle locked. She took a bottle. Dawn. Tomorrow. Where? A flicker of something like relief passed behind his eyes. The Shin Conservatory. No one will bother us there. The Shin family conservatory wasn't a greenhouse, it was a cathedral dedicated to green and growing things. Attached to the sprawling Shin estate on the hills overlooking Lumina Bay, it housed biomes from rainforests to arid deserts, all meticulously climate-controlled. The air itself tasted expensive. Kai met her at a side entrance as the first faint bleed of pink touched the sky. He led her through a silent maze of dripping ferns and exotic fruit trees to a secluded section that mimicked a temperate mountain forest. In its center stood a fully equipped, open-air kitchen, its surfaces made of smooth river stone. A natural spring trickled down a rock face into a clear pool nearby. The tears of the mountain. This is insane, Lina whispered, her voice swallowed by the humid, living air. It's necessary, Kai said, already moving. He was in his element here, his movements reverent as he gathered tools, a traditional sand pot for slow cooking, a bamboo steamer, a blade of obsidian. The broth requires reverence. Speed is its enemy. Together, under the lightning sky, they began. The recipe, once Lina applied the keys Kai had given her, unfolded from the coded poetry into clear, meticulous steps. It was alchemy. The foundation, the mountain spring water went into the sand pot. Kai added a single, perfect dried morel. For the earth's depth, he murmured. The soul, Lina carefully shredded the silvery moon moth orchid. As soon as the threads hit the water, a miracle occurred. A fragrance unfurled, not powerful, but profound. It was the smell of cold starlight, of distant, clean snow, of something ancient and peaceful. The scentless flower had found its voice. The breath of the east wind, this was the technique. As dawn broke fully, they set up the bamboo steamer over a separate pot of seawater and specific eastern seaweeds Kai produced. Into this they placed a smaller bowl containing the now orchid-infused water. They sealed the lid. For 20 minutes, as the sun crested the horizon and the first sea-salted breeze of the day would, in theory, filter through the conservatory's vents, the broth gently steamed, absorbing the breath. The fire, finally, they transferred the broth back to the sand pot. Here, Lina took over. This was her inheritance. She added 3 ingredients from her mother's cart that were pure, nostalgic warmth, a knob of ginger smashed with the flat of her knife, a single-star anise pod, a twist of dried tangerine peel. The fire isn't about heat, she said, more to herself than to him. It's about memory. The memory of home. Kai watched her, his analytical gaze softened. That's the ingredient my family could never replicate. They let the broth simmer for hours, a slow, hypnotic dance of bubbles. The conservatory came alive around them, birds singing, plants trembling. They didn't speak much. They didn't need to. The shared focus, the rhythmic prep of a few simple side ingredients, wild rice, foraged greens, created a harmony more eloquent than words. By mid-morning, it was done. They ladled the clear, amber broth into 2 simple ceramic bowls. It looked unassuming. It smelled like a memory you couldn't quite place. They sat at the stone counter, facing each other. A shared, nervous anticipation hung between them. To legacy, Kai said softly, raising his bowl. To not poisoning ourselves, Lina replied, a faint smile touching her lips. They drank. The experience was not gustatory, it was emotional. The first sip was a cool, high note of orchid and mountain air, pure, clarifying. Then the deeper, umami warmth of the morel and sea breath bloomed on the tongue. Finally, the finish, the gentle, familiar embrace of ginger and tangerine, a comforting hand on the shoulder. It didn't just taste good. It felt good. A sense of profound calm, of centered strength, washed through Lena. The lingering anxiety about her father, the fear of the consortium, the weight of expectation had all receded, not gone, but put into perspective. She felt capable. She felt whole. She looked at Kai. His eyes were wide, his usually guarded expression one of open awe. A faint, healthy color had returned to his cheeks. The lingering tension from his injury seemed to ease from his shoulders. It's not a dish, he breathed. It's a reset. For the palate. For the spirit. Lena's heart swelled with a triumphant, poignant joy. This was her mother's genius. Not complexity for show, but simplicity with profound intent. This was harmony. The moment of peace was shattered by the violent buzzing of Kai's phone on the stone. He glanced at it, and his face hardened back into its familiar mask of ice. He showed her the screen. A financial news alert. Headline: Hostile tide in Lumina Bay? Iron Chefs Consortium launches surprise bid for Liang Group's flagship restaurant holdings. The article detailed a lightning-fast, aggressive stock purchase and a call for an emergency shareholders meeting. The consortium was citing management instability and unfulfilled visionary promises as grounds for a takeover. The subtext was screamingly clear: give us the recipes, or we take your entire empire. They felt it, Kai said, his voice grim. They have people everywhere. They must have sensors, informants. They felt the creation of something truly harmonious. It's a threat to their entire model of artificial flavor manipulation. This is their countermove. Lena's newfound calm didn't vanish, but it crystallized into something sharp and determined. The broth had given her clarity. Her father's weak, desperate bargain had just put everything her mother had built, not just recipes, but a philosophy, a way of caring for people, on the auction block. She stood up, the last of the precious broth cool in her bowl. Then we're not finished in the kitchen yet. Kai looked at her, a question in his eyes. We just proved the recipe works, she said, a fierce light in her gaze. Now we have to figure out how to use it as a weapon. Not to harm. To heal. To protect. She looked at the sandpot, then at the news headline. If they want a war over flavor, we'll give them one they can't stomach. The inheritance was no longer a mystery in a book. It was fire in her blood, and broth in her bones. And for the first time, she wasn't facing it alone. She had an ally with obsidian knives and a mind as sharp as her own. The real cooking was just about to begin. The calm bestowed by the phoenix broth lasted exactly 37 minutes, the time it took to speed from the serenity of the Shin Conservatory to the panicked chaos of the Liang Group's corporate headquarters. The sleek tower, once a symbol of her father's aspirational success, now felt like a besieged castle. Lena marched through the glass doors with Kaishan, a silent, imposing shadow at her shoulder. Employees scurried like startled fish, their whispers a tide of hostile takeover and emergency board meeting. They found Liang not in his panoramic corner office, but huddled in a dim server room, surrounded by the hum of machines and the ghostly glow of monitor lights. He looked like a man who had already lost. Explain, Lena said, her voice cutting through the electronic whir. No greeting. No pretense. Liang flinched, his eyes darting from her to Kai and back. Lena, this is not the place. It's the perfect place, Kai stated coolly, leaning against a server rack. No windows. Soundproofed. No one to perform for. Just the truth, Liang. She's earned it. The use of his first name, without title, seemed to deflate Liang completely. He sank onto a rolling chair, his head in his hands. After your mother died, he began, the words ripped from somewhere deep and rotten, I was lost. The card, it was hers. The magic was hers. I had ambition, but no soul. The restaurant group was failing. Then, George Zhu of the Iron Chefs Consortium approached me. He spoke to the floor. He'd always been obsessed with your mother's talent. Hated that she looked down on his chemical cuisine, as she called it. He offered me a lifeline, a massive investment, no questions asked. All he wanted in return was first refusal on any of Lin Feng's future projects or discoveries. I thought he meant if I ever opened a new concept. I was desperate. I signed. Lena's blood ran cold. You sold my mother's unborn work. I didn't think there was any work. Liang cried, looking up, his face etched with agony. The book was gibberish. A grieving woman's poetry. Then you came and you started to understand it. And they knew. They have people everywhere. At the school, in the markets. They felt you getting closer. The broth, it was a seismic event to them. A proof of concept. He gestured helplessly at a monitor displaying crashing stock prices. This is the refusal. They're calling in the debt. They want the book. All of it. Every coded recipe, every note. Or they take everything, the restaurants, the property, my name, and then they'll come for the book anyway, and for you, with nothing left to shield you. The sheer, devastating selfishness of it took Lena's breath away. He'd mortgaged her mother's legacy, and then her own safety, for a chance to play restaurateur. Before she could unleash the torrent of fury building in her throat, the server room door hissed open. Viola stood there, her usual composure shattered, her eyes wide with a fear that looked entirely different from Liang's guilt. It was the fear of a cornered animal seeing its shelter dismantled. "They're here," she whispered. They followed her to the boardroom. Not the consortium, but their messenger. A woman in a stark white suit, her hair pulled into a razor-sharp bun. She looked like a scalpel given human form. On the table sat a single, embossed envelope. "Miss Lee," the woman said, her voice devoid of inflection. "On behalf of the Iron Chefs Consortium and Chairman George Zhu, a challenge. A public duel. Blade to blade at the Lumina Bay Epicurean Gala, 3 nights hence." Lena didn't touch the envelope. "I don't accept challenges from bullies. The terms are these," the woman continued, as if she hadn't spoken. "You and a chef of the consortium's choosing will prepare a single dish. A panel of 3 anonymous masters will judge. If you win, the hostile takeover bid is withdrawn, and the debt contract with Mr. Liang is voided." A cold smile. "If you lose, you will surrender Lin Feng's recipe book, in its entirety, and submit to an exclusive, long-term consultancy with the consortium." It was slavery. Wrapped in linen paper and formality. "She's not doing it," Kai said, stepping forward, his voice a low threat. "The offer is not for you, young Master Shen," the woman replied. "Though your grandfather's decline is a cautionary tale for those who resist progress." The insult to his family hung in the air, toxic and deliberate. Lena's mind raced. Refusal meant her father's ruin and the consortium coming for her anyway, with no rules, no witnesses. Acceptance was a trap, but it was a trap on a public stage. It was a chance. "Who's the judge?" she asked. "Anonymous. Impeccable credentials. You have my word." "Your word is worth less than yesterday's fryer oil," Lena snapped. She looked at Liang, who was shaking, at Viola, who was staring at her with a desperate, unfamiliar intensity, at Kai, whose clenched jaw spoke of violent restraint. She saw the whole collapsing house of cards her father had built. She reached out and picked up the envelope. It was heavy. "I have conditions. I choose the format. No obscure ingredients. A test of foundational skill. The chef's truth format." It was an old, almost mythical challenge, creating a dish that revealed the essential nature of the cook, using only a core protein, a starch, and 3 from a provided market basket. The woman's eyebrow twitched, the first crack in her facade. The format favored soul over spectacle, which was the consortium's entire weakness. She inclined her head. "Agreed. The gala is black tie. You will be provided a station. Do not be late." As the woman left, the room deflated. Liang crumpled into a chair. "You shouldn't have. I'll find another way." "There is no other way," Lena said, her voice surprisingly steady. She turned to leave. "Wait." The voice was Viola's. She stepped forward, her hands trembling. She wasn't looking at Lena with disdain now, but with a strange, resolute calculation. "You need a second. For the duel. Protocol demands it." Lena stared at her. "You cook?" "I understand presentation. I understand the optics of that room. And she glanced at Liang, a flicker of old resentment there. "I am tired of this family being a leaf in someone else's storm." It was the closest to solidarity Viola would ever come. Before Lena could respond, another voice cut through, loud and startling from the doorway. "She doesn't need you." Jean Wei stood there, his hair slightly mussed, his designer jacket slung over his shoulder. He'd been listening. His eyes, usually full of lazy contempt, were sharp, focused. He looked at his father with disgust, at his mother with pity, and finally at Lina. "You need someone who knows how they think," Jean Wei said, walking into the room. He pointed a thumb at his own chest. "I've been trying to get an internship with their marketing arm for a year. I've studied them. I know their favorite tricks, their psychological plays. I know which of the anonymous judges they've probably flown in." He locked eyes with Lina. "Let me be your second. Let me help you get them." The offer was so shocking, so utterly out of character, that the room fell silent. Leon gaped at his son. Viola's hand flew to her mouth. Lina studied him. This wasn't kindness. This was ambition, redirected. A chance to be on the winning side of a historic drama, to spit in the eye of the entity that had spurned him. It was a motivation she could understand, even trust more than sudden familial loyalty. "Why?" she asked simply. "Because," Jean Wei said, a fierce, ugly smile on his face, "I'd rather be the brother of the girl who beat the Iron Chefs than the son of the man who got eaten by them." It was the most honest thing he'd ever said to her. Lina's gaze swept the room, her broken father, her stepmother grasping for agency, her stepbrother offering a blade of his own. It was a fractured, pathetic team. Her eyes finally found Kai Shin, who had been watching the entire exchange in silence. He gave a barely perceptible nod. "This is your battlefield now." She looked back at the white envelope in her hand, then at Jean Wei. "All right," she said. "You're in. We start training tonight. You get me every scrap of intel you have." Then she turned to Kai. "And you?" He straightened up, the ghost of a challenge in his eyes. "I'll be there. But not as your second." He stepped close, his voice dropping so only she could hear. "The rules say a chef of the consortium's choosing. They haven't announced who it is yet." He let the implication hang. He was a Shen. His family was powerful, but had been neutral. What if the consortium forced him to be their champion? The ultimate humiliation. The stakes spiraled higher, more personal, more vicious. Lina met his gaze, seeing the conflict, the danger. "Then I guess we'll see where we stand when the knives are drawn," she said softly. She walked out of the boardroom, the envelope feeling like a declaration of war. The duel wasn't just for her mother's book. It was for her father's fragile empire, for her stepbrother's bruised ego, for the soul of cuisine itself. And the boy who had just begun to show her his heart might very well be standing across the flame from her, blade in hand. The banquet of blades was set. The only question left was who would bleed. The 3 days before the gala passed in a fever dream of steam, sharpening steel, and strategy. Lina's kitchen became the borrowed, cavernous space of a closed Lyon Group restaurant. The air grew thick with the ghosts of 10,000 meals and the palpable tension of their makeshift war council. Jean Wei proved to be a revelation. Gone was the indolent rich kid. In his place was a tactical savant with a vendetta. He arrived with dossiers, printouts, photos, encrypted forum threads. "Their likely champion is Chef Albin," Jean Wei announced, slapping a photo of a severe-faced man with eyes like frozen chips on the stainless steel counter. "Bulgarian. Nicknamed the Architect. He doesn't cook food, he builds edible structures. Won the Trans-European Culinary Prix with a deconstructed baklava suspended in a honey air foam. He's all technique, zero heart. His weakness? He thinks soul is a marketing term." Lina studied the photo. "Then we don't fight him on technique. We can't win there." "Exactly," Jean Wei said, a fierce grin spreading. "We weaponize your soul. The chef's truth format is perfect. He'll build a skyscraper. You'll build a home." Viola, true to her word, focused on the theater of it. She procured Lina's outfit, not a traditional chef's jacket, but a tailored, high-collared tunic in deep indigo, with wide sleeves that could be cinched at the wrist. Functional, but elegant. "You must look like you belong on that stage, not like you escaped the scullery," she stated, her old sharpness now redirected into a kind of desperate curation. Kai was absent. A single text the first night read, "Neutral ground is a myth. Preparing accordingly." It was neither warning nor assurance. It was a fact. His absence was a constant, gnawing presence in the kitchen. Lina practiced. The chef's truth format's mystery basket was simulated by Jean Wei and Viola throwing random ingredients at her: purple sweet potatoes, salted duck eggs, fresh turmeric root, bitter melon. Each time, she had to center herself, find the story, and cook her truth. It was exhausting, exhilarating. She found her truth wasn't in the grandeur of Misty Peaks, but in the cart's steady flame, the unbroken line of care from her mother's hands to hers. The night of the Lumina Bay Epicurean Gala arrived. The venue was a soaring, glass-domed atrium filled with the city's elite, gliding between champagne towers and ice sculptures that melted in real time. The air smelled of perfume, privilege, and profound artifice. In the center, under the largest crystal chandelier, were two kitchen stations. They weren't workstations, they were altars. Polished marble, embedded induction hobs, racks of glistening, identical knives. A velvet rope separated them from the murmuring crowd. Lena entered from the service corridor, her heart hammering against her ribs. She saw him immediately. Not Albin, but Kai Shin. He stood by the consortium station, dressed in a formal black chef's jacket, his face a mask of impenetrable calm. Their eyes met across the divide. No smile. No nod. Nothing. The betrayal, or the gambit, was complete. A sleek moderator took the microphone. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to a historic Blade to Blade. Representing the forward-thinking vision of the Iron Chefs Consortium, a chef known for his breathtaking precision, Chef Albin. The tall Bulgarian emerged, giving a stiff bow. The applause was polite. And his opponent claiming the legacy of the revered Lin Feng, the challenger from Misty Peaks, Lina. The applause was sparser, mixed with curious murmurs. She walked to her station, feeling 1,000 eyes on her. Then the moderator continued. And by special arrangement, acting as sous chef to Chef Albin for this evening, we are honored to have the scion of the Shin dynasty, a prodigy of celestial dragon Kai Shin. A ripple of shocked excitement went through the crowd. This was the twist. This was the cruelty. Forcing Kai to publicly dismantle her was a message to every family in the room: no one is beyond our reach. Lena's stomach turned to lead. She gripped the edge of her marble counter to steady herself. Jean Wei, positioned as her official second at a small prep table behind her, hissed, "Don't look at him. Look at me. Breathe." The mystery basket was unveiled. Protein, pigeon. Starch, forbidden rice. The three choices: fresh lotus root, wood ear mushrooms, and Sichuan peppercorns. Albin's mind would be whirring: sous vide pigeon breast? Crisp confit leg? A peppercorn soil? Lena's mind went silent. Then she heard her mother's voice, not a memory, but an instinct: pigeon is the bird of homecoming. It finds its way. So must the dish. Jean, she whispered, her voice suddenly steady. We're making congee. He blinked. Congee? At the Epicurean Gala? They'll laugh us out of we're making congee, she repeated, fire in her eyes. A deep, rich, black forbidden rice congee. We're braising the pigeon whole with the wood ears and lotus root. The peppercorns aren't a garnish, they're in the braising liquid. We're bringing the cart to the chandelier. A slow, wild grin spread across Jean Wei's face. Okay. Let's get laughed at. The gong sounded. Time, 60 minutes. Chaos erupted into focused energy. Albin and Kai moved with terrifying synchronicity. It was a ballet of tweezers and liquid nitrogen. Kai, his back to Lena, was reducing a port wine sauce to a mirror glaze, his movements flawless and cold. He didn't falter. He didn't glance back. Lena and Jean Wei worked in a different rhythm. Hers was the assured pulse of the cart, the scrape of the cleaver through bone, the sizzle of aromatics in hot oil. Jean Wei's was the frantic, precise energy of a convert rinsing the forbidden rice until the water ran clear, julienning lotus root with a speed he didn't know he possessed. She braised the pigeons in a heavy pot with soy, rock sugar, star anise, and a bold handful of Sichuan peppercorns. The numbing, citrusy fragrance rose in a defiant cloud, cutting through the delicate scents from the other station. A few nearby socialites coughed in surprise. With 30 minutes left, disaster struck. As Lena went to move the giant pot of simmering congee to a back burner, her cinched sleeve caught the handle. The heavy pot tipped. Scalding, precious porridge, the foundation of her dish, sloshed over the rim, a devastating wave heading for the drain. And oh, she cried. Jean Wei didn't think. He shoved his own arm, clad in a thin cotton jacket, into the path of the spill. The hot congee slopped over his forearm. He gasped, his face white with pain, but he steadied the pot. He saved 2/3 of it. Jean. Lina grabbed a clean towel, her hands shaking. It's fine, he gritted out, though tears of pain stood in his eyes. It's fine. Strain it. Keep going. We're not losing to that asshole because of a spilled pot. It was the moment their shaky alliance forged into steel. Lina strained the congee, her hands moving faster than ever. She shredded the tender, fragrant braised pigeon meat, mixed it with the softened wood ears and lotus root, and folded it back into the deep, purple-black congee. She finished it with a drizzle of sesame oil and a scatter of finely sliced scallion greens. Time. Both dishes were presented simultaneously to the three judges, their faces hidden behind a one-way screen. Albin's dish was, as predicted, a sculpture. A perfectly rectangular block of crispy forbidden rice soil, upon which rested a rose-pink slice of sous-vide pigeon breast, a delicate tuile of rendered skin, a quenelle of foie gras mousse, and a single, perfect Sichuan peppercorn encapsulated in a shimmering sphere of vinegar. It was a masterpiece of engineering. It said nothing. Lina's dish was presented in a simple, wide ceramic bowl. The inky congee was studded with treasures: shreds of meat, dark mushrooms, translucent lotus root. The steam carried the complex, comforting, daring aroma of peppercorn and star anise. It was a humble bowl of incredible depth. It said everything. The judges tasted in silence. The crowd held its breath. Judge One's voice, electronically distorted, finally crackled through the speakers. Dish 1. Technical perfection. A marvel of modern gastronomy. Emotionally inert. Judge 2, Dish 2. Technically flawed. The texture of the congee is slightly inconsistent. But the flavor narrative, it is a journey from intrigue to comfort to a lingering, beautiful numbness. It has a voice. It was a split decision. It came down to the third judge. The silence stretched. Then, the third judge spoke, and the distortion couldn't hide a familiar, aged, rasping quality that made both Lina and Kaishan freeze. A chef's truth, the voice said slowly. Is it in the unblemished perfection of the single note, played in a sterile room? Or is it in the sometimes messy, brave symphony of flavors that speaks of a specific hearth, a specific heart? A pause. I have eaten food that aimed for the stars and left me cold. Tonight, I have eaten a dish that aimed for the heart, and in doing so, reached something far higher. The winner is Dish 2. The dome erupted. Not in universal cheers, but in a storm of gasps, applause, and outraged murmurs. Lina stood, stunned, her knees weak. They'd won. Against Albin. Against the consortium's sabotage. Against the world. Her eyes flew to Kai. He was looking at her, and for a fleeting second, the mask was gone. In his eyes was a profound, fierce pride and a terrifying warning. He gave a single, almost imperceptible shake of his head. Don't celebrate yet. The moderator, flustered, reclaimed the mic. A stunning result. The contract is void. Now, as per tradition, the judges will reveal themselves. The screen lifted. Judge 1 was a celebrated French chef. Judge 2 was a renowned food anthropologist. Judge 3 was an old man in a wheelchair, his body frail but his eyes burning with fierce intelligence. Shen Lao. Kaishan's grandfather. The crowd's noise died into a stunned hush. The patriarch of the Shen family, who had not been seen in public since his decline, had just broken his own family's public neutrality to save Lin Feng's daughter. Kai stared at his grandfather, his expression one of shock, then dawning, horrified understanding. This wasn't his gambit. This was his grandfather's. And the old man had just declared war on the consortium from his wheelchair. George Zhu, chairman of the Iron Chefs, a bulky man with a smile that didn't reach his cold eyes, stood from his front row seat. He clapped, slowly, deliberately. A beautiful performance, he said, his voice carrying in the sudden quiet. Truly moving. The sentimentality of the old guard. He looked directly at Shen Lao, then at Lina. A battle, young lady, is not the war. You have won your father's freedom. But the war for the future of taste has just begun. And I do so enjoy a proper campaign. He turned and walked out, his entourage swallowing him. The victory felt hollow, suddenly fragile. They had won the duel, but they had awakened the dragon. As the crowd began to chatter wildly, Lina looked at Jin Wei, cradling his burned arm with a triumphant smirk. She looked at Kai, whose face was once again a closed door, staring at his grandfather with a storm in his eyes. She looked at her simple, empty bowl. The symphony was over. The echoes of the clash were just starting to reverberate. And they were all, now, well and truly in the middle of it. The silence in the back of the Shin family car was a living thing, thick with words unsaid and battles postponed. Kai-shin stared out the window, his jaw set so tightly Na could see the muscle flickering. The triumphant glow from the gala had evaporated, replaced by the cold reality of his grandfather's very public, very dangerous gambit. They weren't heading to the Liang house or to CDCI. The car climbed, leaving the neon grid of Lumina Bay for the winding roads that led into the dark, sleeping hills. Where are we going? Li Na finally asked, her voice small in the luxurious quiet. Where we can't be heard, Kai said, not turning. Where the walls don't have ears tuned to George Zhu's frequency. After an hour, the car turned onto a gravel path barely visible in the headlights, ending at a secluded traditional compound that seemed to grow from the mountainside itself. Wood and plaster, curved tile roofs, the soft glow of paper lanterns. This was no showpiece estate. This was a sanctuary. Inside, the air was warm and smelled of aged wood, medicinal herbs, and a faint, clean smoke. In the central hearthroom, seated on a cushioned chair by a crackling fire, was Shen Lao. Out of the wheelchair, wrapped in a simple quilt, he looked even friendlier, but his eyes the same dark roast as Kai's burned with undiminished fire. So, the old man rasped, a smile touching his wrinkled mouth. The little phoenix. You cook like your mother. You fight like her too. Li Na stood awkwardly, still in her indigo tunic, feeling the weight of his gaze. You shouldn't have done that. You've made yourself a target. I was already a target, he barked, the force of the words triggering a dry cough. Kai moved instantly, handing him a cup of tea with a mixture of practiced care and simmering anger. Shen Lao sipped, composing himself. My illness, it was no natural decline. A slow poison. Elegant. Almost untraceable. A warning from the consortium when I refused to share my research on neurogastronomy. Li Na's breath caught. They poisoned you? A chef's revenge, Kai said, his voice icy. They couldn't beat him, so they decided to delete him. Grandfather's research was the last barrier to their flavor drug project. He understood how food truly interacts with memory, emotion, the nervous system. They wanted to weaponize it. He said no. Shen Lao waved a trembling hand. Enough of the past. I intervene tonight because you, child, are the future. You are the living proof that harmony cuisine cannot be reverse-engineered in a lab. It must be felt, lived, passed on. Lumina Bay is a poisoned well for you now. You need clean air. You need to remember where the flavor begins. He looked at his grandson. Take her to Misty Peaks. To Sifume. Kai stiffened. Grandfather, the consortium will be watching every route. They will watch the roads, the trains, the airports, Shen Lao interrupted. They will not watch the old postman's trail. You remember it. You walked it once before. A shadow of profound pain passed between the two men, a reference to something old and terrible. Kai looked away, his throat working. Go, Shen Lao said, his voice final. Let the mountain remind you both what you're fighting for. Before you forget. The old postman's trail was not a trail. It was a vertical suggestion, a crumbling seam in the rock face, known only to locals and, apparently, to runaway Shenairs. They left before dawn, dressed in borrowed, rugged clothing, with nothing but small packs. The journey was hours of brutal, silent climbing, the only sounds their labored breath and the distant cry of hawks. Kai moved with a grim, familiar determination, often reaching back to pull her over a difficult crest, his hand firm and impersonal. As the sun crested the peaks, bathing the world in gold, they crested the final ridge. And there it was. Not the tourist village, but the true heart of Misty Peaks, a cluster of ancient wooden buildings clinging to the mountainside, connected by rope bridges, steam from hot springs mingling with the morning mist. The scent was intoxicating pine, damp earth, wild ginger, and the unmistakable, carbonized kiss of wok hay from a dozen cooking fires. This was the real culinary academy. A woman stood on the porch of the largest building, watching their approach. She was perhaps 50, her hair streaked with gray and tied in a practical knot, her face handsome and unreadable. She wore a simple tunic and trousers, stained with 100 different ingredients. This was Sifume. The city spits out its troubles, and they land on my doorstep, she called out, her voice like stones smoothing in a river. Shen boy. You look less like a ghost than the last time you crawled here. Kai, to Li Na's shock, bowed deeply. Sifu. May's sharp eyes turned to Li Na, sweeping her from head to toe. And you. Lin Feng's daughter. You have her hands. She turned and walked inside. Come. The mountain doesn't care for your dramas. It only cares if you can listen. What followed were not lessons, but revelations. Sifu Mei didn't teach recipes, she taught awareness. She made Li Na sit for an hour by a rushing stream, blindfolded, identifying ingredients by scent alone as Mei tossed them into the water. Upstream: wild onion, a particular lichen, a type of mountain mint. Your mother, Mei said later, as they pounded glutinous rice in a giant stone mortar, understood that harmony isn't balance. Balance is static. Harmony is active. It is the conversation between the fire and the pot, the hand and the knife, the hunger and the food. The consortium wants to create a monologue. A command. Feel this. True cuisine is a dialogue. Li Na, sweating and breathless, felt something unlock in her soul. This was the language her mother's book was written in. Kai worked separately, but not apart. Mei had him tending the ancient, wood-fired clay oven, a task requiring constant, intuitive adjustment. Li Na watched him one afternoon. The arrogant, icy air was gone. Here was a boy covered in ash and concentration, his whole being focused on nurturing a consistent, living heat. He looked at peace. And younger. The change happened on the third evening. They were preparing a simple communal meal, a vast pot of stew made with foraged mushrooms, wild greens, and a hare one of the other students had caught. Kai was chopping wood for the fire with a fierce, rhythmic intensity. Suddenly, the axe missed the block, flying from his hands as he doubled over, a wave of dizziness hitting him. He caught himself on a tree stump, his face pale as moonstone, a sheen of cold sweat on his brow. Li Na was at his side in an instant. Kai? It's nothing, he gasped, trying to straighten, but his body wasn't obeying. The altitude liar, Sifu Mei said, appearing from the shadows of the cookhouse. She took his face in her rough hands, looked into his dilated pupils. The city's poison is still in you. Not just your grandfather's. Yours. The poison of living in a war before you had a name for it. Come. She led him, leaning heavily on Li Na, not to the infirmary, but to the hot springs. In a secluded, rock-lined pool shrouded in steam, she made him sit in the chest-deep, mineral-rich water. The mountain draws out the false heat, she said, then left them. The silence was different here. The only sound was the sigh of the steam and Kai's gradually slowing breaths. The rigid control had melted away, leaving only exhaustion and vulnerability. The last time I was here, he said, his voice barely above a whisper, echoing off the rocks, I was 10. I'd walked for 3 days after they left me in a warehouse. My parents. He laughed, a hollow sound. Grandfather found me half dead on this very path. Sifu Mei brought me back. Not just my body. She made me taste real food again. Made me remember that flavor could be a comfort, not a weapon. Li Na's heart ached. She finally understood the source of the ice, the calculation. He'd built his entire personality as a fortress around that 10-year-old boy abandoned in the dark. You don't have to carry it all alone, she said softly. The war, your grandfather's legacy, my mother's legacy, we can carry it together. He turned his head to look at her through the steam. The walls were down, completely. What she saw was raw, terrifying, and beautiful. When I'm with you, he said, the words a confession pulled from a deep well, the silence in my head, it's not empty anymore. It's full of your stupid, brilliant, fearless noise. And for the first time in forever, I don't want it to be quiet. It wasn't a declaration of love. It was something more fundamental. A declaration of need. A testament to her disruptive, healing presence in his barren world. Later, dried and dressed, sitting by the central fire with bowls of that simple, profound stew, the final piece clicked into place. Sifu Mei spoke to Li Na. Your mother left the book, but the book is just the key. The treasure is the cuisine itself, and it must be lived to be understood. You are not just a keeper, child. You are a cultivator. The consortium fears you because you have the one thing their chemistry cannot synthesize: context. A soul shaped by a specific hearth, a specific mountain, a specific love. She looked at Kai. And you, wounded soldier. Your hearth has been cold too long. Perhaps it is time to let someone else tend the fire. Under the vast, starlit bowl of the mountain sky, with the taste of wild herbs and honesty on their tongues, the alliance solidified into something unbreakable. He was no longer her rival or her reluctant protector. She was no longer his burden or his mission. They were two halves of a broken recipe, discovering they made a startling, potent new whole. Lina looked at the flames, then at Kai's tired, calm profile. The boy who had everything and nothing. Sifume, she said. When we go back, we're not going to play defense anymore. A slow, fierce smile spread across the older woman's face. Now, she said, you sound like your mother's daughter. The mountain has given you its strength. Time to give the city its heart back. And maybe, her eyes twinkled with grim mischief, a case of very bad indigestion. The hearth had been tended. The phoenix and the wolf were fed, rested, and ready. The retreat was over. The reclamation was about to begin. The descent from Misty Peaks felt not like a retreat, but a homecoming to a battlefield they now understood. The city air of Lumina Bay, once thrilling, now tasted thin and metallic, laced with the aftertaste of conspiracy. They returned not to the Liang mansion, but to the one place that felt like neutral, sacred ground, the private kitchen in the Shin conservatory. The warm, humid air of the mountain biome was a comforting lie. The real work ahead was cold, hard, and digital. Spread across the stone counter were not ingredients, but Jean Wei's pilfered files, financial reports on the consortium, and Lina's mother's book, now bristling with sticky notes. Jean Wei, his forearm bandaged and his demeanor transformed from spoiled heir to grizzled intelligence officer, pointed a pen at a spreadsheet. They're vulnerable. The PR hit from the duel stung. Their stock dipped. But they're pivoting. Look at this. He slid a glossy brochure across the table. It advertised Jus Zenith, the future of flavor, a massive, upcoming tasting event for investors. They're launching a new line of neuroenhancing seasoning cubes. Concentrated joy, focused dust, serenity salt. They're going mainstream with the chemical warfare. Kai, leaning against the counter with his arms crossed, studied the brochure with disdain. Grandfather's stolen research, repackaged for suburban kitchens. They've taken the poetry of memory and turned it into a pill. Lina ran her finger over her mother's open book. The final, still-coded recipe wasn't for a dish to eat. It was titled, simply, The Antidote. The instructions were more obtuse than ever. To cleanse a poisoned palate, one must not add, but remind. Find the flavor of the self before the world made its mark. It's not a literal antidote to a physical poison, she murmured, thinking aloud. It's for their psychological poison. For the artificial memories they're trying to sell. So how do you cook that? Jean Wei asked, skeptical. You don't cook a memory, Kai said, his eyes on Lina, understanding dawning. You evoke it. You make it tangible. Lina's mind was racing, sifting through the coded lines. The self before the world, her earliest, purest memory wasn't of her mother's elaborate feasts. It was of being sick, maybe 4 years old, feverish and miserable in their tiny apartment over the cart. Her mother, exhausted from a long day, hadn't reached for medicine. She'd made congee. But not just any congee. A plain, white rice congee, simmered for hours until the grains burst into a silken, cloud-like porridge. No protein, no vegetables. Just rice, water, and a single, split, salted duck egg yolk stirred in at the end, melting into golden ribbons. It was the food of utter simplicity, of unconditional comfort. The flavor of being cared for when you had nothing to give in return. That was the self before the world. The core. The antidote to artificial joy wasn't a competing complexity, it was the overwhelming power of a simple, profound truth. I need to make congee, Lina announced. Jean Wei blinked. Again? That's your master plan? Congee floored them once, but they'll be expecting a trick now. Not a trick, Kai said, a slow smile touching his lips. It was the first real smile she'd seen from him since their return, and it held a fierce, shared secret. A revelation. She's not making congee for the judges. She's making it for the people. The plan was audacious, ridiculous, and just right. They would crash Jus Zenith. Not to protest, but to offer a counterpoint. A memory station right outside the glittering event, serving one thing, plain, perfect, salted egg congee. Free. The challenge was the code. To unlock the full antidote recipe, which she now believed was a method for amplifying this memory-evoking quality, she needed to cook that childhood dish here, in the heart of the artificial city, and infuse it with the intention the book described. The night before the event, in the silent conservatory kitchen, she tried. She used the most exquisite japonica rice, pristine mountain water, a heritage breed duck egg of legendary quality. She cooked it with flawless technique. It was delicious. It was also just congee. It lacked the transformative magic of the phoenix broth. The final key was missing. Frustrated, she slammed a ladle down. It's not working. I'm remembering, but the feeling isn't translating. It's just nostalgia. Kai, who had been quietly preparing a tea for them, observed. You're trying to project a memory onto the ingredients. Maybe you need to let the ingredients remind you. He walked to a different cabinet, one storing common, humble dry goods. He pulled out a cheap, plastic bag of generic, short-grain white rice and a jar of mass-produced salted duck eggs from a convenience store brand. This, he said, placing them before her, is what your mother could afford when you were 4 and she was running a cart, not an empire. This is the truth of the memory. Not the ideal. The real. Lena stared at the ordinary ingredients. He was right. She'd been trying to elevate the memory, to make it worthy. But its power was in its humility. With a deep breath, she started over. Cheap rice, tap water, a fatty, overly salted egg yolk. As she stirred the pot, she wasn't the heiress of a legacy. She was a little girl in a small, warm room, watching her mother's tired back as she stirred the same pot, the steam forming a halo around her in the lamplight. The love wasn't in the luxury, it was in the effort itself, the sacrifice of time and energy for no other reason than to soothe. As that specific, visceral memory fully engulfed her, something shifted. The congee in the pot began to change. Not in appearance, but in presence. The steam carried a sweeter, cleaner, profoundly comforting aroma that seemed to cut through the very air of the conservatory, making the exotic flowers nearby seem suddenly garish and false. Kai inhaled deeply, his eyes widening. There it is. Lena quickly glanced at the book. The final lines of code, previously opaque, now seemed to rearrange themselves in her mind's eye. They weren't instructions for adding another ingredient. They were instructions for intention. A specific way of focusing one's own emotional resonance into the dish during the final stage of cooking, a kind of culinary mindfulness her mother had perfected. She followed the unspoken guide, pouring her clarified memory, her longing, her gratitude, into the stirring motion. The congee shimmered, finished. She ladled a small bowl for Kai. He tasted it. He didn't speak. He simply closed his eyes, and a single, unguarded tear traced a path down his cheek. When he opened them, they were clear, calm, and full of a wonder that had nothing to do with flavor profiles. He cleared his throat. You made me remember my mother. Not as she became, but before. When she'd sing. I haven't thought of that in 15 years. The antidote wasn't a flavor. It was a catalyst for authentic memory. It cleared the psychic palate cluttered with artificial sensations and reminded the soul of its own, true, emotional taste. The next evening, outside the gleaming Zenith Tower, under a hastily rented awning, their memory station was set up. It was stark next to the holographic displays and laser shows of the consortium event. Just Lena, a giant pot, stacks of simple ceramic bowls, and Jean Wei handling the crowd with newfound, charismatic gravity. Kai was their lookout, blending into the shadows, watching for consortium thugs. As the wealthy, curious investors drifted out during a break, Jean Wei called, tired of being told what to feel? Taste what you've already felt. The original. The free. Skeptical, they took bowls. The first few sips were met with puzzled looks. Then, the magic worked. A stern-faced financier's eyes grew distant, then soft. A socialite laughed, then dabbed her eyes, murmuring, "This tastes like my grandfather's fishing hut." A young tech mogul stood very still, then whispered, "I forgot about the treehouse inside." George Zhu was giving a triumphant speech about owning the language of emotion. But a trickle of his audience was leaving, drawn by the murmurs from outside, holding empty bowls with dazed, thoughtful, genuine smiles on their faces. Zhu, alerted, came to the glass-walled foyer and saw it. He saw Lena, the girl who had beaten him, not attacking him, but offering a silent, profound alternative. She wasn't fighting his fire with fire. She was dousing it with a tide of quiet, personal truth. His veneer of avuncular charm finally cracked. Rage, pure and ugly, twisted his features. He turned to a lieutenant and snarled something, pointing violently at Lina. Kai saw it from the shadows. He moved to her side. Time to go. The message is delivered. As they packed the minimal gear, leaving the still bubbling pot as a parting gift to the city, Lina looked at the tower. She hadn't crashed the event. She had upstaged it. Not with noise, but with a silence so delicious it was all anyone could remember. The recipe was complete. The antidote worked. And the consortium, for all its power, had just realized its greatest threat wasn't a rival conglomerate. It was a single, honest bowl of congee, and the girl who knew that the most powerful flavor in the world was a real memory, resurfaced. The war was no longer about saving her father's empire. It was about reclaiming the collective palate, one remembered feeling at a time. The victory of the memory station was a quiet tremor, not an earthquake. But in the rarefied world of Lumina Bay's elite, tremors were felt in boardrooms. The Liang Group stock, which had been on life support, saw a curious, tentative uptick. Sentiment analysis reports, which Jean Wei gleefully printed and slapped on the conservatory wall, showed a shift in social media chatter from Zhu's zenith to congee girl and real flavor. It wasn't a financial win. It was a narrative one. And George Zhu hated narratives he didn't control. His retaliation came not as a business move, but as a blade aimed at the heart. Early morning, 3 days after the Zenith event, Liang was arrested at the mansion. The charge, corporate fraud and embezzlement, relating to the original consortium investment a decade ago. The evidence, Zhu's lawyers claimed, had just come to light. It was a masterstroke. It removed Liang as a player, humiliated the family publicly, and sent a clear message to Lina: you can play with street food and sentiment, but I control the courts, the cells, the real power. The mansion became a panicked hive. Viola was on the phone screaming at lawyers who kept putting her on hold. Jean Wei paced like a caged tiger, his newfound purpose crumbling back into helpless fury. They're going to bury him to get to you. Lina stood in the middle of the ornate living room, feeling the walls close in. Her father was a weak man, a selfish man, but he was her father. And he was being devoured because of her. Her phone buzzed. A single, unknown number. A text: the only currency they understand is loss. To save one restaurant, be ready to burn it all down. The old place. Noon. Come alone. It wasn't signed. It didn't need to be. The phrasing was pure, unvarnished Kaishin. The old place could only mean one thing: the original Liang's noodle cart location, the tiny storefront her mother had first upgraded to before Liang's ambitions moved them to gleaming towers. It had been shuttered for years. She didn't tell Jean Wei or Viola. They would try to stop her, or worse, come with her. This was from the shadows. This was Kai's territory. The old shop was in a forgotten alley, paint peeling, windows grimed over. The faded, cheerful cartoon of a noodle bowl on the sign looked like a ghost smile. The door was unlocked. Inside, it was a tomb of dust and memories. The old L-shaped counter, the few stools, the giant, rusting walk range. And in the middle of it, standing like a general surveying a derelict battlefield, was Kai. He wasn't alone. With him were 3 people: a wiry older woman with cybersecurity tattoos on her knuckles, a young man whose glasses reflected the glow of multiple tablets, and a massive, silent man who looked like he could fold steel with his hands. Lina, Kai said, his voice all business. Meet the team. Maya, our ghost in the machine. Ben, our data sifter. And Leo, who ensures our physical operations remain uninterrupted. What is this? Lina asked, her eyes wide. This is the end of playing defense, Kai said, his gaze burning in the dim light. Zhu thinks he's checkmated us by taking Liang. So we change the game. We don't ask for your father back. We take something Zhu values more. He nodded to Ben, who projected a holographic schematic above a dusty table. It was the blueprints for Zhu's Zenith Tower, highlighting the sub-basement levels. The consortium's R&D lab and their central server farm are here. All their stolen research, their chemical formulas, their neurogastronomy data, and the master financial ledger that details every bribe, every coercion, including the falsified evidence against your father. It's a fortress, Maya said, her voice a dry crackle. Biometric locks, pressure sensors, thermal imaging. Digital ghosts and real ones. So we give them a different ghost to worry about, Kai said, turning to Lina. We give them you. In the one place they'd never expect a final stand. He pointed to the old noodle range. We reopen. Tonight. Right here. We throw an invitation-only last service, a tasting menu of your mother's recovered recipes, the true Harmony cuisine. We invite the food press, the few clean investors, the curious elite. And, a cold smile touched his lips, we make sure the invitation leaks to every single one of Zhu's board members and key investors. Jean Wei, who had somehow followed her and was listening from the doorway, let out a shocked laugh. You want to use a pop-up restaurant as a distraction? While we what? Hack the Pentagon? While we, Maya corrected, nodding to her team, use the enormous, archaic power draw of a fully reactivated industrial walk range as a surge cloak to piggyback into their sub-basement grid and wipe their servers. And while Leo pays a visit to the evidence locker at the precinct holding the fake documents on Liang. Lina's mind reeled. It was insane. It was brilliant. It was a multi-course meal of chaos. And what's my role in this? Just cook? Kai looked at her, and the intensity in his eyes was a physical force. Your role is to be utterly, devastatingly brilliant. To be so magnetic, so captivating, that every eye in the city is on this dusty little room, and every sensor in Zhu's tower is confused by the power surge from your walks. You are the sun. We are the eclipse happening behind you. The plan was a symphony of disparate parts. Jean Wei and Viola would handle the front of house, vetting guests and managing the brittle social theater. Kai's shadow team would execute their technical and physical heists. And Lina would cook her mother's legacy back into existence, one stolen recipe at a time. The next 12 hours were a blur of manic preparation. Viola, with terrifying efficiency, procured everything: linens, vintage ceramics, candles that smelled of mountain pine. Jean Wei worked the phones, his natural arrogance perfectly pitched to pique the interest of Lumina Bay's jaded tastemakers. An exclusive taste of the real Lin Feng, before the law swallows her whole legacy? Yes, there's a wait list. Lina, in the grimy kitchen, came alive. With Ben's help, she cross-referenced her mother's now-decoded book with the shop's old inventory logs, piecing together what the last service menu must have been. A 7-course journey: 1. Phoenix tail prawns, reactivated with mountain sai orchid. 2. Jade dynasty soup, the clarified phoenix broth. 3. Moonlit mushroom dumplings. 4. Sizzling harmony rockfish. 5. Memory lane congee, the antidote. 6. 5-spice braised forgiveness pork belly. 7. Sweet red bean and osmanthus promise soup. As she prepped, infusing, braising, and fermenting at a superhuman pace, the old shop transformed. Dust was swept away. Candles glowed. The air grew dense with impossible, layered aromas that told a story of loss, love, and fierce resilience. At 7 p.m., the first guests arrived, cloaked in curiosity and noirish thrill. The tiny space was packed, humming with low, expectant chatter. Outside, Leo lurked in an unmarked van. In a warehouse across town, Maya and Ben sat before a wall of screens. And in the Shin Conservatory, Kai monitored everything, the silent conductor of the chaos. Service began. Course 1 arrived. The first bite silenced the room. It was more than food, it was a time machine. The flavors were vibrant, clear, and emotionally resonant. The story of Lin Feng unfolded on their tongues. As Lina fired the woks for Course 4, the sizzling rockfish, the power in the old building surged, lights flickering dramatically. The guests gasped, then laughed, thinking it part of the rustic charm. In the van, Maya hissed, "Surge cloaking now." Her fingers flew across a keyboard. Ben watched lines of code scroll. We're in. Downloading and deploying the digital cleanse. All their research, their flavor maps turning to digital confetti. Across town, Leo, dressed as a utility worker, walked calmly into a police evidence annex, flashed a forged order, and walked out with a sealed box. Course 5, the antidote congee. Lina served it herself, looking into the eyes of each guest. She saw defenses melt. She saw real, unguarded humanity. In that moment, she wasn't just a chef, she was a priestess offering a sacrament of memory. That's when the black SUV screeched to a halt outside. George Zhu had arrived, not with lawyers, but with a squad of private security, his face a mask of apocalyptic rage. The distraction had worked too well. He hadn't gone to his tower, he'd come to the source of the insult. Jean Wei moved to block the door. Private event, I'm afraid. Zhu backhanded him across the face, sending him stumbling into a table. Glasses shattered. Guests screamed. Lina stepped out from behind the counter, a heavy cast-iron wok scraper in her hand. This is my mother's house, she said, her voice cutting through the panic. You are not welcome here. You little gutter rat, Zhu snarled. You think you can humiliate me? I will burn this novelty to the ground and have you scrubbing floors in my lowest factory. He gestured. His guards moved forward. Then, from the shadowed kitchen doorway, a voice spoke, calm and lethal. I believe the lady asked you to leave. Kaishan emerged. He wasn't dressed for cooking or for stealth. He was dressed for a boardroom, but he moved like a panther. He didn't wait. He disarmed the first guard with a wrench of his wrist, used the man's body as a shield against the second, and swept the legs out from a third. It was efficient, brutal, and over in seconds. Leo, having completed his objective, materialized behind Zhu, placing a massive hand on his shoulder. The police will be here shortly, Mr. Zhu, Kai said, straightening his cufflinks. I imagine they'll have questions about the evidence tampering charges that just landed on the chief prosecutor's desk, courtesy of some newly discovered financial discrepancies. He smiled. It was the coldest thing Lina had ever seen. Your move. Zhu looked from Kai to Leo to Lina, standing fierce and unyielding with her wok scraper, to the room full of influential witnesses now recording everything on their phones. He saw his empire of shadows crumbling under the glare of real light, real food, and real, inconvenient courage. He spat on the floor, turned, and stormed out, his remaining guards scrambling after him. The silence he left behind was profound. Then, Jean Wei, wiping blood from his lip, picked up a spoon and tapped his empty congee bowl. The clear, ringing sound filled the shop. One by one, every guest followed suit. A symphony of spoon-on porcelain, a standing ovation of pure, resonant sound. Lina looked at Kai across the wreckage. He gave her a single, slow nod. The sun. The eclipse. The final service was over. The last course, the sweet promise soup, would never be served. It didn't need to be. The promise had been kept. The legacy was saved, not in a book, but in a reclaimed space, in the hearts of a roomful of people, and in the fierce, unbreakable alliance between a phoenix and the wolf who had chosen to guard her fire. The war wasn't won. But the battlefield was now theirs. The morning after the last service dawned on a city holding its breath. The gossip feeds and financial news channels cycled between two stories: the dramatic arrest of culinary magnate George Zhu on charges of fraud, evidence tampering, and industrial espionage, and the whispered legend of the illicit tasting menu that had somehow triggered his downfall. In the quiet of the Shin Conservatory, the aftermath felt less like victory and more like the resonant stillness after a final, crashing chord. Lina stood before the giant sandpot, now cool, scrubbing it clean with methodical strokes. The physical labor was a relief, a way to quiet the roaring in her veins. Kai entered, the soft swish of the glass door the only announcement. He carried 2 steaming cups of tea. He looked exhausted, the shadows under his eyes pronounced, but the perpetual tension in his shoulders had eased into something like weary peace. They released Liang an hour ago, he said, placing a cup beside her. The charges were dropped for lack of evidence. He's at home. Viola is managing him. Lina didn't look up, focusing on a stubborn patch of rice starch. Is he grateful? Or just relieved? Mostly ashamed, I think. Which, for him, is progress. Kai leaned against the counter, watching her work. The consortium is in freefall. Their board is scattering. The neuroenhancing line is cancelled. My grandfather's research, what they didn't destroy, is being returned. It was everything they had fought for. The debt was void. The poisoner was exposed. The legacy was secure. So why did she feel untethered? The book, she said finally, rinsing the pot and setting it aside. It's fully decoded now. It's not a weapon. It's a curriculum. A map for teaching harmony cuisine. Kai nodded slowly. So the question becomes, what does the teacher do? She met his gaze then. I'm not a teacher. I'm a cook. I need a kitchen. A real one. Not a stage, not a battlefield. A hearth. A knowing smile, the one that transformed his whole face, finally appeared. I may have a proposal. The location was not in the gleaming gastronomy district, nor in the trendy alleyways. It was on a quiet, tree-lined street in a residential neighborhood, a place where the scent of real cooking from real homes already filled the air. The space was small, formerly a beloved but shuttered tea house. It had wide windows, warm wood floors, and a kitchen visible from the dining room and open heart. Standing inside the empty room, Lena could already hear the sizzle of a wok, the murmur of contented diners, the clink of bowls. It's perfect, she breathed. It needs work, a voice said from the doorway. Jean-Wei stood there, hands in the pockets of his sharply tailored jacket, a fading bruise on his cheekbone from Ju's blow. He walked in, assessing the space with a critical, now expert eye. Ventilation needs an upgrade. Lighting is too harsh. But the bones are good. I've secured the lease, Kai said, joining them in the center of the room. But a restaurant needs more than a chef and a landlord. Viola entered then, her heels clicking on the bare wood. She carried a leather binder. She looked at Lena, and for the first time, there was no calculation, no resentment, only a stark, professional assessment. I have worked the front of house for a man whose vision was a mirrored ceiling and a gold leaf menu. I would like, she said, opening the binder to reveal elegant, minimalist designs for logos, menus, and uniforms, to try working for a vision that has a soul. If you'll have me. Lena was stunned. She looked at the designs. They were beautiful, subtle, evocative of mountain mist and clean lines. You did these? I have a degree in design from Lumina Arts, Viola said, a hint of her old defensiveness returning. Before I became a professional social climber. Jean-Wei slung an arm around his mother's shoulders, a gesture of surprising affection. She's good. Annoyingly good. The team assembled itself in that empty room. The wounded heir with a knack for strategy. The fallen socialite with an artist's eye. The wolf in chef's clothing with resources and silent loyalty. And the phoenix, ready to rise from neither ashes nor battlefields, but from a simple, clean kitchen. We'll call it Hearth, Lena said, the name arriving fully formed. A beat of perfect silence, then unanimous nods. The months that followed were a different kind of frenzy. Permits, construction, sourcing, testing. Liang, in his quiet, chastened way, helped navigate the bureaucratic labyrinth, his old contacts now viewing him with pitying curiosity that he endured without complaint. He never asked for a role, but he showed up, painted walls, and sometimes, when he thought no one was looking, he would stare at Lena with an expression of such profound, sorrowful pride it hurt to witness. Sifu Mei came down from the mountain for a week, a whirlwind of pragmatic wisdom. She approved of the kitchen layout, scoffed at the expensive oven, fire is enough, and taught Lena a final, wordless lesson. She sat with her in the empty dining room at dawn and simply listened to the street wake up. The first ingredient, she said, is the sound of the community you wish to feed. The menu for Hearth took shape. It wasn't the 7-course epic of the last service. It was a single, seasonal, tasting menu that changed weekly. 5 courses only. It would tell a story, sometimes of a memory, sometimes of an ingredient's journey, always of harmony. The antidote congee would always be available, not on the menu, but for anyone who asked, a silent offering for a weary soul. The night before the soft opening, Lena found herself alone in the finished kitchen. Everything was in its place, gleaming under the low lights. The anxiety was a quiet hum, a familiar pre-service buzz she'd known at the cart, magnified 1,000-fold. She heard the door open and close. She knew his step. Kai came to stand beside her, looking out the pass-through window into the dark dining room. Ready? No, she said honestly. What if it was only powerful because it was forbidden? What if peace isn't as compelling as war? He turned to face her, leaning back against the counter. You once told me tradition isn't a prison, it's a foundation. This, he gestured around them, is your foundation. Not for fighting. For building. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, familiar wooden box, the one from Old Crow that had held the moon moth orchid. I had this refinished. She opened it. Inside, on the new velvet, lay not the orchid, but the simple, worn mountain ghost coin she had given him for his lunar birthday, now strung on a sturdy leather cord beside its twin, the one he had given her. You said the rule was not to lose your temper, he said, his voice uncharacteristically tentative. I've been thinking. Perhaps the real rule is not to lose the person who helps you keep it. Her heart, which had been fluttering with anxiety, settled into a strong, steady rhythm. She looked from the coins to his face, seeing not the icy air or the wounded soldier, but the boy who had climbed a mountain to heal and had found her there. "You still owe me a birthday gift, you know," she said softly, a smile touching her lips. "For this year." "I know." He didn't move closer, but the space between them evaporated. "I was thinking a partnership. Not just in a restaurant. In all of it. The messy, quiet, ordinary, extraordinary fight to make something true, every single day. Until we're old and arguing over the salt levels in the congee." It wasn't a proposal of marriage. It was a proposal of a life. A shared hearth. Lena took the coin from the box, the leather cord cool in her fingers. "You'd get sick of my noise," she whispered. "Never," he vowed, the word absolute. "It's the only soundtrack that makes the silence in my head bearable. More than bearable. Welcome." She slipped the cord over her head, the twin coins settling heavy and right between her collarbones. Then she reached up, her fingers brushing the lingering worry from his brow, and finally closed the last, fragile distance between them. The kiss was not a collision of rivals or a desperate solace in chaos. It was the first perfect bite of a long-awaited meal complex, nourishing, deeply familiar and yet startlingly new. It tasted of honesty, of chosen peace, of a future simmering with quiet fire. When they parted, the anxiety was gone. The kitchen was no longer a question mark, it was an answer. The soft opening of hearth was not filled with Lumina Bay's glitterati. The guests were Old Crow, who sat in the corner sipping mushroom broth with a grunt of approval, Sifu Mei, who complained the rice was too perfect while emptying her bowl, the tattooed soup dragon vendor from the midnight market, and a handful of nervous, proud neighbors. Lena cooked. Kai expedited, his voice calm and low at the pass. Jean Wei floated through the dining room with a genuine, unforced charm. Viola presided over the front with a grace that finally seemed unburdened. The food was simple. Perfect. A story of that week's early autumn yield. It ended with a dessert not from Lin Feng's book, but newly created, a black sesame paste filled with a core of salted egg yolk custard, shaped into a perfect, glossy mooncake. It was called Eclipse. Bitter, sweet, salty, rich, a harmony of opposites held in a delicate, complete whole. As the last guests left, sighing with contentment, the team gathered in the kitchen, stained with sauce and sweat, glowing with triumph. No one spoke. They just looked at each other, at their kitchen, and knew. Later, on the small balcony overlooking the sleepy street, Lina leaned into Kai's side, his arms solid around her shoulders. The twin coins rested together between them. "Your father left a note," Kai said quietly. "With the host stand. It said, she would be so proud. I finally am." Lina absorbed that, letting the complicated truth of it settle. It was enough. Downstairs, Jean Wei was already arguing with Viola about the wine list for next week. The familiar, beloved clang of a wok being scrubbed echoed from the kitchen. The cage of expectation, of legacy, of other people's wars, was gone. In its place was not an ending, but a beginning, a warm, bustling, imperfect, glorious beginning. They had not just won a war. They had built a hearth. And from its steady flame they would cook the rest of their lives, one honest, harmonious dish at a time. The final flavor was not of victory, but of home. And it was delicious.